The late afternoon sun was painting everything in gold as I slowed near Jane's street. It had been years since I'd knocked on her door without planning it first, but something inside me told me to do it. On impulse, I sent her a quick text. "I'm passing by your place. I'll bring something for us to eat so we can catch up, just like old times." Just typing those words stirred memories I hadn't touched in so long. Memories of being young, carefree, and certain our friendship could withstand anything. The second Jane opened the door, her smile hit me like a warm wave. She hugged me tight, and for a heartbeat, I was 20 again, standing in a college hallway with my best friend. Inside, the sweet smell of vanilla candles mixed with the aroma of coffee that seemed to wrap itself around me like a blanket. We sat at her kitchen table, unpacking pastries and sandwiches, and the room filled with laughter that bubbled up so naturally. It felt like slipping into a favorite sweater I thought I'd lost years ago. We gossiped about neighbors I'd never met, and she whispered with that mischievous sparkle in her eyes that I remembered so clearly. I laughed, really laughed, in a way I hadn't in months. For that brief stretch of time, I let myself sink into the comfort of it, the familiarity, the feeling of home. But somewhere deep inside me, I sensed it, an invisible shift in the air, a thread pulling me towards something I wasn't ready to see. Jane leaned across the table, lowering her voice like we were back in our dorm, trading secrets no one else could ever hear. She had that sparkle in her eyes, the one that made even the most ordinary gossip feel like a grand revelation. I watched her hands as she spoke, still animated, still expressive, and I thought about how many years of my life had been marked by those gestures. It felt safe, familiar, like no time had passed at all. As she laughed, I caught myself studying her face in the glow of the kitchen light. There were faint lines now, subtle reminders of years lived and battles fought, but the essence of her was untouched. She was still Jane, my Jane, the girl who once held my hand through heartbreak, who snuck me into late-night parties, who swore we'd never let life make us strangers. My chest tightened with a strange mix of gratitude and longing. I had missed this more than I realized. We poured coffee, the steam curling upward as if to stitch the past to the present. The rich aroma filled my senses, grounding me in this moment. For a while, nothing else mattered. Work deadlines, marriage duties, the weight of adulthood all seemed to slip away. I just wanted to hold on to this fragile pocket of joy, where friendship felt untouched by time. But little did I know, this very comfort was setting me up for the sharpest cut of all. Jane disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, rummaging for extra plates, and I leaned back in my chair, just soaking it all in. The hum of her refrigerator, the clink of dishes, the faint scent of lemon cleaner, it all wrapped around me like the soundtrack of an old memory. I felt suspended between who we were and who we'd become, as if the years in between had folded away like paper. When she returned, she plopped down beside me with that same carefree energy, sliding a plate across the table. We dug into the pastries, laughing so hard that tears pooled in my eyes. It was like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten, a part untouched by responsibilities, by routine, by disappointments I rarely admitted to anyone. I let myself breathe, maybe too easily, in the presence of someone who once knew every corner of my soul. But even as the laughter echoed through the house, a flicker of something unsettled tugged at me. A whisper in the back of my mind that wouldn't quite quiet down. I brushed it aside, convincing myself it was nothing, just a trick of nostalgia making me overly sensitive. Still, deep down, I felt it. The calm before a storm I didn't yet know was heading straight for me. Jane excused herself with a laugh, saying she'd only be gone a minute. I nodded, sipping my coffee as her footsteps faded down the hall. That's when her phone, sitting carelessly on the table between us, buzzed once. Then again. Then again. The vibrations rattled against the wood, each one louder than the last, like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. At first, I leaned forward only to glance at the screen, thinking I'd tell her someone was trying to reach her. But the moment my eyes caught the name glowing in bold letters, my body stiffened. Michael. My Michael. My husband's name, as clear as daylight. A rush of heat tore through me, the kind that makes your skin prickle as if you've been burned from the inside out. And then the words, line after line flashing before my eyes, promises of late nights, stolen moments, confessions of desire so raw I felt sick. Words he never whispered to me, not even once. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. My throat went dry, but my face stayed frozen, calm, unreadable. Because if Jane walked back right now, she would never know my world had just collapsed in silence. My hands itched to grab the phone, to scroll further, to rip open every secret they'd ever exchanged. But I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at those glowing words until they blurred, until my chest ached like I'd been punched. Inside, I was unraveling. Outside, I looked like a woman sipping coffee, waiting for her friend to come back from the bathroom. I thought of every night Michael had kissed me goodnight, every promise he'd made about loyalty and love, every time he swore I was his only one. And here it was, the truth, spelled out in emojis and half-sentences, vulgar and shameless. Each vibration felt like another nail hammering into my ribs, sealing me into a coffin of betrayal I hadn't asked to climb into. Yet even as my stomach twisted, I forced my body into stillness. No trembling hands, no tears, no sharp inhale that might give me away. I swallowed the storm, burying it so deep that not even Jane, with all her history of reading me like an open book, would catch on. Because this moment, as painful as it was, wasn't the ending. No. It was the start of something far colder, sharper, and deliberate. I heard the soft flush of the toilet, the creak of the bathroom door opening, and in that instant, I forced myself to look away. My eyes shifted back to my coffee, my posture easy, casual, like nothing in the world had changed. By the time Jane's footsteps approached, my lips had already shaped into a smile, the kind I'd practiced my whole life when hiding pain. She walked back in, chatting about something mundane, completely unaware that her phone had just betrayed them both. I nodded, laughed in the right places, even reached for another bite of pastry. All the while, those words pulsed in my mind like a second heartbeat. I could almost hear Michael's voice, not speaking to me, but to her. That thought alone nearly shattered me. But I refused to give them that power, not yet. Instead, I tucked the storm deep inside, letting it settle into something colder, steadier. I knew I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't even cry. I'd wait, watch, and strike when the time was right. Because this wasn't over. No, this was only the beginning of a decision I'd already started making in silence. I kept my smile steady as Jane sat back down, unaware that her entire world had just shifted in my eyes. She poured more coffee, her laughter light, and I matched it, beat for beat. Inside, though, I was hollowed out, scraped clean by the blade of betrayal. But I knew myself well. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not now. Not ever. Instead, I let her words wash over me like background noise, nodding at stories I barely heard. My mind was already racing ahead, calculating, stitching together threads of revenge so sharp they almost cut me on the inside. There was a strange comfort in it, this calm clarity born from pain. I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't beg. I'd use their own secrets against them, at the right time, in the right place. When I finally stood to leave, I placed my hand on Jane's shoulder as if nothing had changed. My voice was light, almost playful. "Why don't you come over this weekend? Bring your husband too. We'll have dinner together, just like family." She hesitated for half a beat, but then her face brightened, completely blind to the trap I had just set. And in that moment, I felt the cold satisfaction of control returning to me. As I walked toward the door, Jane followed close behind, still talking about recipes, her kids, the kind of ordinary chatter that once would have warmed me. This time, it only rang hollow. I nodded politely, even laughed, all while my mind replayed those messages like a broken record. Each word was fuel, feeding a fire I refused to show on my face. The evening air hit me when I stepped outside, cool against skin that still burned from what I'd read. My chest rose and fell steadily, but every breath carried the weight of my decision. I wasn't going to confront them in whispers or arguments behind closed doors. No, my stage would be larger, brighter. My silence now was only a rehearsal for the performance I would give them soon. Sliding into my car, I gripped the steering wheel and stared ahead. The street was quiet, almost eerily so, as if the world itself was waiting for me to act. A bitter smile curled on my lips. They thought they could betray me in secret, hide in shadows. But what they didn't know, what Jane couldn't possibly imagine, is that I was already planning the spotlight that would expose them both. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and silence. My mind wasn't on the road. It was mapping out every detail of what was to come. I could almost see the dinner table in my head, the wine glasses, the polished silverware, the forced smiles. It would look like an evening among friends, but beneath it all, the truth would be simmering, waiting for me to serve it at just the right moment. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the raw sting of betrayal had cooled into something sharper. It wasn't pain anymore, it was strategy. Every step Michael had taken in secret would be turned against him. Every word he'd whispered to Jane would become a weapon in my hands. They thought they'd fooled me, but they'd only given me the script for their own downfall. Inside, the house was quiet, almost too quiet. I set down my bag, looked around the familiar walls, and let the silence wrap around me like armor. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't collapse. I'd wait. And when the weekend came, I'd invite them into my home, into my world, and give them a dinner they would never forget. The night arrived quicker than I expected. My dining room glowed under the soft light of candles, the table set with polished silverware and glasses that sparkled like crystal secrets. Every detail was intentional: the folded napkins, the carefully chosen wine, the aroma of roasted herbs drifting from the kitchen. I wanted it perfect, not for them, but for me. This was my stage, and I would play the gracious hostess to the very end. Michael sat stiffly at the head of the table, his tie a little too tight, his smile strained. I watched him from the corner of my eye, memorizing the nervous twitch of his fingers against the stem of his glass. He had no idea I knew. Jane walked in with her husband a moment later, her laugh too bright, her perfume thick enough to sting. They all exchanged greetings, but under the surface, tension pulsed like a drumbeat. I welcomed them warmly, as if nothing in the world was amiss. My voice was smooth, my smile flawless. I poured the wine, passed the bread, asked questions that made everyone relax just enough to think this was simply dinner. But inside me, every second was a countdown. They thought they were safe, hidden in their little secret. Tonight, I would peel back the mask and let the truth choke the air out of the room. I moved around the table with ease, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor, each sound steady and deliberate. The roasted chicken gave off a savory aroma, mingling with the sharper scent of red wine as I poured refills. Their voices rose and fell, polite chatter about work, vacations, and weekend plans. To anyone else, it would have seemed like a simple dinner among friends. But I could feel the undercurrent. A heaviness only I recognized. Jane avoided my eyes when she spoke, focusing instead on her plate or on her husband's casual remarks. Michael tried too hard, his laughter coming a beat late, his compliments too rehearsed. I studied them both, every glance, every shift in tone, like an audience member who already knew the ending of the play. The silence between their words was louder than the words themselves. I let them all believe the evening was ordinary. I asked about Jane's kids, nodded along to Michael's story about work, even threw in a laugh or two that sounded convincing enough. But beneath my calm surface, anticipation curled in my stomach. It wasn't nerves, it was readiness. Every gesture, every smile, was one step closer to the moment I had been planning since the afternoon I discovered their little secret. When the plates were nearly cleared and the wine glasses half empty, I lifted mine and gently tapped it with a fork. The sound rang sharp and clear, silencing the table in an instant. All eyes turned to me, expecting a toast about friendship or family or some trivial celebration. I smiled, my hand steady as I raised the glass. To love, to friendship, and to loyalty, I said smoothly, letting each word linger in the air. Then I paused, tilting my head just slightly. Though, of course, some people here clearly don't know what those words mean. My pulse stayed calm, steady, as I reached into my pocket and laid my phone face up on the table. The screen lit up, every message from Michael to Jane glowing like a confession. The silence was brutal. Jane's husband leaned forward, confusion clouding his face until the words on the screen sharpened into clarity. His jaw dropped. Michael went pale, his hand frozen midair. And Jane, her cheeks flushed, her breath caught, looked like the walls had caved in on her. I sat back, sipping my wine slowly, savoring the moment I had crafted so carefully. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating, until I knew none of them could breathe easy. Then I leaned forward, locking eyes with Michael first, then with Jane. "You've been having your little secret dinners," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. "So I thought it was only fair the truth be served at mine." Jane's husband shot up from his chair, his face a storm of disbelief and betrayal. He grabbed his jacket with shaking hands, muttering something I couldn't quite catch, and stormed out the door without looking back. Jane burst into tears, her shoulders heaving, her mascara bleeding down her cheeks. She begged, actually begged, for me to listen. But I kept my gaze cool, my expression unreadable. Michael tried to speak, to stammer out an excuse, but I cut him off before he could form the words. Reaching calmly into my bag, I slid a neatly prepared folder across the table. Divorce papers. His eyes widened, his mouth falling open as though he hadn't seen this ending coming. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply rose to my feet, the power in my silence louder than any scream could have been. Jane reached across the table, her hands trembling, her words spilling out in broken sobs. "Brenda, please, you don't understand. It wasn't—" But I didn't let her finish. I simply pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against the floor louder than her excuses. Her voice cracked, desperation dripping from every syllable, but to me it all sounded like noise. She had already chosen her side. Michael, still frozen in his seat, looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. His face had lost all color, his lips parted as though he might beg, but nothing came. For years he had spoken with confidence, with authority, with that tone that made me believe he was mine alone. Now he had no words left, not for me, not for anyone. The silence wrapped around him like a noose. I gathered the papers, laid them neatly back in front of him, and placed the pen beside them with deliberate care. "Sign them when you're ready," I said evenly. No anger, no bitterness, just finality. Then I turned toward Jane, her face wet and blotchy, her sobs shaking her body. "You wanted what was mine? Now you can keep it. Both of you. But don't ever mistake that for winning." I straightened my shoulders, picked up my glass, and drained the last sip of wine. Then, without a glance back, I walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Jane's muffled sobs and Michael's shallow breathing, the sound of two people drowning in the mess they created. My heels clicked against the floor with a rhythm that felt like a victory march. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, filling my lungs with something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. For once, I wasn't carrying his lies, or her betrayal, or the weight of pretending everything was fine. I was lighter, sharper, untethered. And in that moment, I realized the real revenge wasn't their humiliation. It was my release. Weeks later, I sat at a new table with new friends, laughter bubbling around me like music. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was radiant, whole, and alive in a way Michael and Jane could never take from me. The whispers of their betrayal still circled through our social circle, but they weren't my burden anymore. He texted her in secret, I thought with a small smile. I made sure the whole world read it.